first ex-Mr. Angelina Jolie. Like, that could have been part of my story, you know? So as we start, you know, we've been going through this whole week talking about living the Catholic life, or living the Christian life, living a life of a disciple. But one of the things I don't know if we've really spent enough time doing is establishing, like, what's the thing we can really trust about the Christian life, living as a Catholic? Because I know all of us, right, we're gonna go back to campuses. And on campuses, there are gonna be a lot of different people believing a lot of different things. And it's really easy in that kind of situation to think like, you know, during that week of Seek, it was great. Hey, Seek and Week, it all rhymes. During that week of Seek, it was so good because I was surrounded by people who believe, we all believe the same thing, we're united in our faith, but now I'm back on campus, and who knows? I mean, I don't even know what to believe anymore. Because if you're anything like me, in college, I took a number of classes like that were called, you know, comparative religion classes. Have you ever heard of any comparative religion classes? Anyone ever taken any of those? Yeah, they're great, they're wonderful, and because it's a good thing, right? It's good to study the different religions of the world. It's good to study what the different people around the world believe. But it's interesting because in every comparative religion class you're ever gonna take, it was always the same for me at least, you get the textbook, and each chapter would be a different religion, and so you study Buddhism and Confucianism, and you study Christianity and Islam and Judaism and Zoroastrianism and, you know, whatever, all the other isms. You study all these things to learn about them, and that's wonderful. But at the end of the day, we have to realize that to look at every world religion in the exact same way is not being entirely honest. Because I want to say this, and it might sound a little bit biased, but I don't mean it in a biased way. We can't evaluate Christianity in the same way that we evaluate every other world religion. And again, that sounds like, well, of course you're going to say that, you're the priest. But it's true because why? Because every other world religion that's ever been established has been established by someone who said one of two things. They either said, I have insight into who God is, or they said, I have a revelation from God. Every religion, every world religion either has, I have an insight into God, or I have a revelation from God. Christianity is entirely different. Because the founder of Christianity didn't come on the scene and say, I have revelation from God, or I have insight into God. The founder of Christianity, Jesus, what did he say? He said, I am God. Exactly. He said, I am God. And so if we want to figure out, is Christianity true? We don't have to study every other world religion first. All we have to do is answer one question. Was he telling the truth? All we have to answer is one question. When Jesus said, I am God, was he telling the truth? Because what a lot of people say, I mean, how many times have you heard someone say this? Well, I don't believe Jesus is God, but I believe that he's a holy person. You ever hear anyone say that? Right? I don't believe Jesus is God, but I believe he is a prophet. You know, C.S. Lewis, my good buddy C.S. Lewis, man, that guy. He said, you know, that's the one thing we can't say about Jesus. The one thing we can't say about Jesus is that I don't believe he was God, but he was a holy person. Why? Because he claimed to be God. And if he wasn't God, he was either lying, because he wasn't God and he knew he wasn't God, or he was crazy, because he wasn't God and he didn't know he wasn't God. Those are the only two options, or three options really. Either Jesus was lying, he was a lunatic, or he was the Lord. So let's look at this. Actually, C.S. Lewis does this in his book, Mere Christianity. If you ever want to read a book on your way home on the bus, you can get through the whole thing roughly 3 times. So in it, he says, well, let's look at the story of Jesus. Look at the Gospels and see, does this look like a liar? Well, C.S. Lewis examines this and he says, you know, those people who are like, not just lying occasionally, but like professional liars, pathological liars, they all have the same kind of psychological profile. And that profile is they're narcissistic, they're uncreative, they lack compassion, they're self-involved. But when you look at the Gospels, what you see is a picture of someone who is the exact opposite. He is absolutely creative. He is the definition of compassion. He is completely not self-concerned, he is other-concerned. In fact, remember that time when Jesus is just exhausted and he's going across the Sea of Galilee to get away from the crowds, and they're sitting on the crowd, he goes to the shore, and there are all these people, and he says, my heart is moved with pity for them because they're like sheep without a shepherd. That's not someone who's self-involved. That's someone who wants to pour himself out. He doesn't fit the profile of a liar. No, he might be a con artist, but he doesn't fit the profile of a liar. We'll come back to that in a second. So he doesn't look like a liar. Maybe he's a lunatic. How about this? What's the definition of sanity? I would say this. I would say that a person is sane to the degree that their perception conforms to reality. Would you say that's kind of like, that's what sanity is? You're sane to the degree that your perception conforms to reality. So as an example, if I were to say, I'm a priest, I'd be relatively sane because my perception conforms to reality. If I were to say, I am the best priest in the world, you'd say, okay, a little bit less conform to reality. If I were to say, hola, me llamo Pope Francis. And I really thought I was Pope Francis. I'm like, don't tell anyone, okay? And if I was just, I wanted to bless you, okay, here we go. And if I really thought I was Pope Francis, after a couple minute conversation, you'd be like, okay, backing away slowly from the weird man. If I were to come on the scene and say, hello, my name is Marie Antoinette, have some cake. And I really believed that I was a dead French noblewoman. Pretty quickly, you'd be able to connect the dots and say, you're not connecting the dots. If I were to come on and say, hello, everyone, I'm a butterfly. No, I really am. Like, if I really, you pretty soon catch on that I don't have all my marbles and I'm not connected to reality. Jesus didn't say, I'm a prophet. No, I'm Jeremiah, come back from the dead. He didn't say, I'm even a jelly donut. Jesus came on the scene and he said, hey, you see that big yellow thing in the sky? I did that. He claimed to be God. He claimed to be the uncreated and unstoppable, immortal and all-powerful God. And so after about maybe 30 seconds of conversation, you'd be able to pick up on the fact whether he's connected to reality or not. But everyone who meets Jesus in the Gospels, at least, they're blown away by how absolutely connected he is to reality. So he doesn't seem like a liar, and he absolutely doesn't seem like a lunatic. That only leaves us with one real option, that Jesus is the Lord. At the same time I realize that's not like, you can like poke holes in that all you want. In fact, sometimes we think the only reason people back in the day, that when Jesus was alive, the only reason they believed in him is because they were so stupid back then, people. They didn't know how to program TiVo, they didn't know how to work iPads. Like, they were so dumb. Jesus says, hello, I'm God. They're like, okay, Jesus, kind of like picking the nose. But that's not what happened, right? When Jesus came on the scene and he said something like, because if someone walked onto the stage with me and said, greetings, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Would you be like, cool? What would you say? Prove it. Exactly. You'd be like, okay, buddy, let's see some stuff. And that's exactly what happens in the Gospels, right? All throughout St. John's Gospel, whenever Jesus does a miracle, he doesn't call it miracle. Whenever Jesus does a miracle in John's Gospel, John calls it a sign and wonder. What do signs do? Signs point to something. What are they pointing to? They're pointing to the fact that Jesus is who he says he is. Look at Mark chapter 2. There's this famous story, we all know it, right? There's this paralyzed man and he's got 4 friends, good friends. And they're trying to bring their friend who's paralyzed to see Jesus, but the house Jesus is in is just packed and he can't get through the door. So these 4 friends are so committed to bringing this guy to Jesus, they go on the roof and they start playing Chip and Joanna. And it's like, go Waco, Texas. It's like, even more. And so they start renovating. It's a fixer-upper. It's a skylight now. And we're lowering the guy down in front of Jesus. You ever imagine who owned that house, the guy? He's like, what? Fine. Anyways, the guy lowers in front of Jesus. Jesus looked at the faith of the friends and he says to the man, your sins are forgiven. Everyone's like, say what? And they ask themselves, who but God can forgive sins? And Jesus is like, aha. Aha. Jesus knows what they're thinking and he says, exactly, who but God can forgive sins? Which is easier, to say to the man, your sins are forgiven, or rise, pick up your mat and walk? To prove to you that I am who I say I am. He looks at the man, rise, pick up your mat and walk. And Jesus does this again and again and again. Remember the man who was deaf and he couldn't speak? Even in weird ways, Jesus heals people to prove that he is who he says he is. I always think this story is so funny. Jesus walks up to this man. He can't hear and he can't speak. And so it says in the scripture that Jesus walks up to the man, puts his fingers in his ears, and then spitting touches his tongue and says, be opened. Imagine if you were that guy. You don't know what's going on. You can't hear, right? this guy's coming up, hey, come here. No, it's okay. Touches your tongue. What are you doing, Jesus? What's happening right now? And his ears were open and he could speak. I think the bigger miracle is the fact that he could actually speak like words and language. Do you remember that time? Oh my gosh, it's just, there was a little 12-year-old girl. And her dad runs to Jesus. My daughter is sick. Come to her. By the time they get to her, she's dead. And they say, leave him alone. Jesus says, listen, let me at her. And he takes her by the wrist and he says 2 words. He says, Talitha kumi, which in English means, little girl, arise. And this girl that was dead is now alive. And what's that mean? It means Jesus is who he says he is. One of the biggest ones, I mean, the one I love all of them. I love all of them. But in John chapter 11, there's this story in John 11 where Jesus has these 3 friends. They're sisters and a brother, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. Like, you guys Bible scholars. Have you heard this one before? And Mary and Martha say, Jesus, the one you love is ill. Come quickly. And then it bothers me because Jesus takes his time because he's Jesus. By the time he gets there, Lazarus isn't sick anymore because Lazarus is dead. Never thought of it that way. Well, at least he's not sick. So, and they're all weeping, and Jesus at one point says, take me to where you've laid him, take me to the tomb. This is really important because they bring him to the tomb, and in John chapter 11, it's the shortest verse in the entire New Testament. It's 2 words. When Jesus got to the tomb of Lazarus, his friend who is dead, it just says, Jesus wept. I want to press pause on that for just a second, because I think we need to just reflect. I don't know if you've ever felt like this. If you've ever felt like the stuff that breaks your heart, everyone else thinks is just stupid. Like maybe you fell in love in high school and then the person broke up with you and you're just like so heartbroken and your parents are like, oh gosh, it's just puppy love. You're gonna get over it. Why are you crying? Like, because you're like Bella and you're sitting hunched around and like the camera's going around your head as the months tick by. Like, get over it, Bella. But for you, it was a big deal. Your parents are like, it's no big deal. Sometimes we think that what breaks our heart, God looks at us and says, oh, come on. It's not that big of a deal. You guys, there's heaven. Don't worry about it because listen, everyone dies. Thanks, Jesus. But in this moment, when Jesus sees the tomb of his friend and he sees his friends, sisters, his friends as well, their wound, their grief, their sadness, Jesus weeps. Here's the thing. If you follow Jesus, you follow the God of the broken heart. A God whose heart breaks for what breaks your heart. I mean, he knows what he's going to do. He knows that in like 3 minutes, now Lazarus is going to be alive. He doesn't show up to the tomb and like, okay, this is awesome. This is so great. Okay, guys, just wait. Oh my gosh, this is the biggest prank ever. No. He lets it break his heart. If you follow Jesus, you follow the God of the broken heart, a God who loves you and whose heart breaks for what breaks your heart. And then Jesus does this. He says, roll away the stone. And I love this because in the gospel, the sister of Lazarus says, Lord. Now here's the thing for us. When someone gets sick and someone dies, typically we take them to the hospital first, and then after they die, someone else comes and takes the body and takes them away. And then when they're taken away, then someone else prepares their body for burial, and then someone else buries their body. But in this culture, if you had someone in your family, they would die in your home, and you would watch them die and care for them as they died. Then you would care for their body after they died. You would anoint their body after they died. You would lay their dead body in the tomb. So if you lived in this culture, you know what dead looks like. And apparently, if you lived in this culture, you know what dead smells like. Because Martha says, Lord, he's been dead for 4 days. There will be a stench. Because he's not like the little 12-year-old girl who she just died like half an hour ago. There's plenty of time. She's only mostly dead. She says, Lord, he's been dead for 4 days. There will be a stench. And Jesus is like, I know. Roll away the stone. And I love this because this is the moment when Jesus does, not just comes up to the little girl, rise. He does this remote control resuscitation For standing outside the tomb, he just says 3 words, Lazarus, come out. And then I love this because in John's gospel, it just says, and then the dead man walked out of the tomb. It's one of those moments when I wish that in the Hebrew language they had exclamation marks. Because it'd be like, and then at that moment, the dead man walked out of the tomb. This is crazy because at this moment, Jesus proves he is who he says he is. It's at this moment that John makes a point. He says this, as a result of this, many of the Jews would come to Mary and seeing what he had done began to believe in him. But then, some of the others from that day on, they planned to kill him. Because that's it. Jesus is, I don't know if you know about this, but Jesus is the only thing in the universe, the only one in the universe, that when you meet him, you can't just say, meh. Like someone could be super excited about like a new TV show, like, oh my gosh, have you seen Stranger Things? It's the best thing ever. And then you guys told everyone about it, right? Those people who were yelling. And then the people next to you said, I'll watch it. And you went, eh. Or you have to listen to the new album from whoever. And someone listened to it, they're like, yeah, whatever. Jesus is the one person you can't say meh about. You can't say whatever about. It's either I believe in him or kill him. That's it. That's the only 2 options when it comes to Jesus. It's either I believe in him or kill him. And that's actually what they do. We know this. That's exactly what they do. We know how the story goes. Jesus gets to Jerusalem right after this. Walks into Jerusalem on a Sunday. All that week they examine him. On Thursday night he's arrested. On Friday he's tortured. He carries a cross. He's nailed to that cross. He's crucified. He dies. Now we know that's not the end of the story. We know what happens 3 days later. But here's the crazy thing. The thing that blows my mind is this. So did the disciples, right? Did you ever notice this? That how many times in the Gospels where Jesus tells the disciples what's going to happen? And then when it happens, they freak out? Ever notice? Jesus is like, okay, here's the deal, guys. We're going to Jerusalem. They're going to arrest me. Then they're going to kill me. But don't worry, because 3 days later, I'm going to be alive again. And then when it happens, they're like, what's going on? I mean, honestly, even on Sunday, it says in John's gospel, it says early on Sunday morning, the women are going to the tomb. And they're not going to the tomb because they're like, oh, hey, he said he's going to rise today. Let's go check it out. It says they're going to the tomb. Did you like that? It says they're going to the tomb to anoint his body because they're like, he did. He did. And then this crazy thing is when they get there, the stone is rolled back and you'd think they'd be like, oh yeah, was that today? Awesome. But they're like, what's going on? And so they go into the tomb and you think they see nobody there. They'd be like, oh yeah, that's right. They're like, no, what's going on? In fact, they leave. Mary Magdalene stays, right? And she's weeping and weeping because she's like, I don't know, someone must have taken his body. She sees Jesus and she thinks he's the gardener. And she even talks to him. So if you've taken his body, show me where you've taken him. And Jesus looks at her and says, Mary. And then Mary's eyes are open, right? She's like, oh, Rabboni, and he says, go tell my brothers that I'm alive. And so she runs back to the apostles. And again, when she bursts in where the apostles are, he's alive, I've seen him. You'd think they were like, oh shoot, we're late, But they're all like, no. Think about this. There are 11 apostles left. Only 2 go to even check out the story. Peter and John run to the tomb, and even then, they see the stone rolled away, and they see that the garments laid up there, folded up, and they're amazed, like, what's going on? You think to be like, oh yeah. The angels have to say, okay, McFly, remember when he said what was gonna happen? It says they wandered away, bewildered and amazed, like, what's going on? That day, they're in an upper room, right, locked together for fear. Jesus appears to them, and again, they'd be like, oh yeah. They're like, what's going on? He's a ghost. Jesus is like, pinch me. Okay, people, give me some fish. Remember that? He's proving that he's not a ghost, right? So then he leaves. Remember the one apostle who wasn't there at the time? What's his name? Thomas, right? So I always imagine like Thomas is out like grocery shopping. And he like does the secret knock, getting back in the door, and he opened the door. They're like, Thomas, like Jesus is alive. And he's like, oh man, I missed it. But that's not what Thomas says, is it? They say, Thomas, we saw Jesus, he's alive. And he's like, nope, his groceries, nope. Thomas says, no, unless I put my fingers in the nail marks in his hands and my hand in the spear mark on his side, I'm not gonna believe. And Peter was like, Thomas, you're morbid. That's a little disgusting. Yes, I don't know if that's in the original translation, but it's in my updated version. So what happens a week later, John makes a point of this. A week later, John's writing in his gospel and he says, again, they're all together in one place. And this time, Thomas was with them. Bum, bum, bum. And Jesus appears to them. Imagine if you're Thomas, all of a sudden Jesus is there. You're like, oh no. And Jesus looks at Thomas. Tommy, put her there. And in that moment, what happens? At that moment, Thomas falls to his knees and he says 5 words. My Lord and my God. Because Jesus has just proven that he is who he says he is. That's the thing, you guys. That's the only question we need to answer. To know if we can believe in Christianity, to be Catholic. Is Jesus who he says he is? And he's proven he is who he says he is. The only next thing to realize is if Jesus is who he says he is, then guess what? You are who he says you are. If Jesus is who he says he is, then you are who he says you are. That's not the end of the story, right? Jesus stays with them for 40 days, continues to teach them and be with them and be their friend and be their Lord and be their God. And then he goes out to Bethany outside Jerusalem. And from this place, if you ever want to go there, let's all go to Israel someday, you guys. And he goes to Israel and he's standing out on Bethany overlooking all of Jerusalem. You can see the whole thing. You can see the upper room where Jesus gave us the Eucharist. You can see the Golgotha where Jesus was crucified. You can see where the tomb was right next to it, where he rose from the dead. You can see the whole thing. And at that moment, the apostles ask Jesus, and this is Acts chapter 1, they ask Jesus, Lord, are you at this point? They know who he is, right? They know he is who he says he is. And they say, Jesus, Lord, are you at this point going to restore the kingdom to Israel? Because Israel, the Jewish people are God's people. The Jewish people remain God's people. And they say, as God's people, Lord, are you going to do it now? Are you going to fulfill everything for the whole world? Are you going to bring peace to the world? Are you going to bring hope to the world? Are you going to bring mercy to the world? And Jesus answers them. Lord, you are who you say you are. Are you going to do now what we hope you're going to do? And Jesus looks at them and he says, nope. He says, it's not for you to know the times or seasons. And he says this, but you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you, and then you will be my witnesses here in Jerusalem, in Judea and Samaria, to the ends of the earth. We have to realize this. If Jesus is who he says he is, then you are who he says you are. And what does he call us to be? He calls us to be his. Not just to believe in him. That's the thing, that's the crazy thing. We have too many Catholics who believe in Jesus, but who don't belong to Jesus. We have too many people who say, when it says, well, are you Catholic? Check the box. But when it comes to the rest of the week, it's, well, I just kind of do I do my life, right? That's my least favorite saying of 2016. Hey, dude, what are you going to do? Oh, I'm going to do something else. Okay, man, you do you. You do you. Come over here. I can punch my finger in your face. My fingertip? What's that? I don't even know. I'm doing me, man. But really, realizing this, it's not enough to believe in Jesus. We have to belong to Jesus, which means we have to let him change our lives. He says, you'll be my witnesses. The truth of the matter is, every one of us witnesses to something. Every one of us witnesses to someone. Who does your life witness to? What does your life witness? What does my life witness to? Because if I'm going to belong to Jesus, my life has to be changed. I don't know if you know this, but in the early church, The process of becoming a Catholic took 3 years. I know some of you are in RCIA. Or some of you were recently in RCIA. And it took 9 months. Wow, guys, way to go. No, I really do mean way to go. But imagine this. Imagine that the process of becoming Christian, becoming Catholic in the early church took 3 years. Why? Because the early church, except for that one first day, Pentecost, where it took like 1 hour. And then like 3,000 people came into the church. And then the church realized, oh, that was too quick. Why? Why did it take 3 years? Because the church realized that if you're gonna leave a pagan world and become a Christian, that means you have to change the way you look at the world. In fact, it's so powerful. Jesus rarely ever said, hey guys, come and believe in me. We believe in Jesus, of course, but he said, come follow me. Even more, he said, take my yoke upon you and learn from me. Remember when he said that? Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. What's a yoke? You probably know this. A yoke is a farming implement, right? And it is either made of metal or wood, and it goes around the shoulders of some kind of beast of burden. But almost always what a yoke is, at least in the Middle East, it's rarely a yoke for one animal. Usually it was a yoke for 2 animals. And so when Jesus says, take my yoke upon you, he basically is saying, okay, so get in the yoke with me. Jesus has his yoke, right? He considers himself, our God humbles himself, and he considers himself to be a beast of burden for us, to go to work for us, to serve us, to give his life for us. He puts the yoke around his shoulders, and he says, if you want to be mine, don't just believe in me. Hey, get in the yoke next to me. This means 2 things. It means, one of the things it means is when you put your head through the yoke here, with Jesus here, it means you look like Jesus. You look at the world like Jesus. And if you're gonna believe in Jesus, if Jesus is who he says he is, and we decide to be changed by that, that means we're gonna put the yoke of Jesus on our shoulders. We're gonna look at the world the way he looks at the world. Imagine, if you were a pagan converting to Christianity, that means the way you looked at God, or the gods, was very different. Because if you believed in the Greek or Roman gods, that means you believed that the gods were powerful. It means you maybe believed they were immortal. But the Greek and Roman gods were not just. They were not good. They didn't care about you. The Greek and Roman gods, they did not and could not love you. In fact, there are stories of soldiers in the Babylonian army. There's a Babylonian war god. And if you wanted to do well in battle, what you would do is you go to the temple of this Babylonian war god and you pray, try to get the attention of the Babylonian war god. And if you wanted to have victory in battle, you might even go so far as to take your dagger out, or take your sword out, or take your spear out, and start slashing yourself, and be willing to bleed for this Babylonian war god, to try to get his attention so you can have victory. But if you look at the world like Jesus looks at the world, you look at the Father the way Jesus looks at the Father, all of a sudden you realize, wait a second, there is one God, and he is good, and he cares about me. He actually loves me, and he doesn't want me to bleed for him. He's willing to bleed for me. That Jesus, our God, is a God who was willing to bleed to win your heart. He's not asking you to bleed to win his heart. You already have his heart. Imagine this, to put your head through the yoke of Jesus and look at the Father the way Jesus looked at the Father. What if your prayer looked like that? What if we really became Christians and we began to look at the Father the way Jesus looked at the Father? How did Jesus look at the Father? Remember in the Garden of Gethsemane? Jesus he's sweating blood because he knows what's coming. And he says, Father, let this cup pass from me. Why? Because he looks at the Father as a good dad. He's a good dad. And he can tell his dad whatever is in his heart. I don't want to do this. This hurts, it's hard. But I know I can trust you, Dad. Not my will, your will be done. How different would your prayer be if you looked at the Father the way Jesus looked at the Father? God, this is hard. Dad, this is hard, but I trust you. That's what we're called to do. We're called to look like Jesus. Look at the Father like Jesus. We're also called to look at the world like Jesus. To look at other people like Jesus. And again, if Jesus is who he says he is, you are who he says you are, and the person sitting next to you is the person he says they are. How different would it be if we actually looked at other people like Jesus? There's a great story in Jason Everett's book, St. John Paul the Great. Such a great book. The opening story is, actually Jason told me this story, and he said, oh, there's a story about John Paul II and my bishop, Bishop Brom. Bishop Brom was the former bishop of San Diego, but he's also the former bishop of Duluth. And so I said, you mean my Bishop Brom? And when Bishop Brom was made bishop by John Paul II, and he had his ad limina visit, the visit where you visit the Pope for the first time kind of a thing, or a regular basis, he went in and said, Holy Father, great to meet you. And John Paul looked at Bishop Brom and says, oh no, Bishop Brom, we've met before. And Bishop Brom says, oh no, Holy Father, we've never met. And John Paul says, no, Bishop Brom, we've met before. And no, Holy Father, I'm sorry, we've never come across each other ever. Bishop Brom, we've met before. He's like, Holy Father, I would have remembered meeting the Pope. John Paul drops it and they have the rest of the meeting. After the meeting, Cardinal Dziwisz, who is the Pope's personal secretary, tracks down Bishop Brom and says, never argue with the Holy Father. Bishop Brom says, well, no, we said we met together. Dziwisz says, wait. Were you a seminarian here in Rome and back in 1962 during the second session of the Second Vatican Council? Bishop Brahms, yes. Dziwisz says, you were walking out of the Jesu, which is the Jesuit church, with 3 other American seminarians, while Jean Paul, who at the time was only the Archbishop of Krakow, was walking into the Jesu with 2 Polish seminarians. And he said, you met on the steps. And he could name the other 3 American seminarians, and he said, that's the first time you met John Paul II. And Bishop Brom was like, oh man. The next time he met John Paul, first thing John Paul says is, Bishop Brom, how many times have we met and when was the first time? Bishop Brom says, John Paul, we met twice before. The first time was in Rome. John Paul slaps the desk and says, you remember. Bishop Brom asked Cardinal Dziwisz, he says, how does he do that? And I would say, John Paul's a genius, so that's one. But Dziwisz said, for John Paul II, every encounter with another human being is an encounter with God himself. Because every person, he looks at the world like Jesus looked at the world. Every person's made in God's image and likeness. Therefore, every encounter with another person is memorable. Imagine how would our lives be different if we looked like Jesus. We put our head through the yoke and looked at other people, looked at the Father and talked to him, looked like Jesus. Things will be transformed. Be transformed. But here's the problem. Here's one of the problems. I don't think we want to be transformed. I think one of our main things is I just want to look like everyone else. You ever find yourself doing that? Like I don't want to be super different. I don't want to be way out there. I just want to fit in. I just kind of want to look like everyone else. I kind of just want to live like everyone else. I kind of just want to be like everyone else. You know, if you've ever felt yourself feeling that way, which all of us have. I mean, remember junior high? Not only that, remember your first week of being on campus? And you're like stressing out, like, okay, are flip-flops too like informal, or like, is that like a past thing? Should I wear dock shoes? Maybe this is a guy thing, but like, or maybe they don't care, I guess. Should I wear a dress? Is this a dress thing? Is it a shorts thing? Is it a capri thing? Are capris out? Are they in? I don't know. Like this whole idea of why? Because I just want to fit in. I just want to be like everyone else. Again, if that's you, this is nothing new. This is so old. All of us struggle with this. I just want to be like everyone else. I don't want to be different. I don't want to be transformed. I just want to be like everyone else. In fact, this goes all the way back to God's chosen people, the Jewish people. When they were in Egypt, when they were slaves in Egypt, they were there and they lived like the Egyptians. They ate like the Egyptians. They talked like the Egyptians. They walked like the Egyptians. I just really wanted to say that. But they just started living like everyone else. And then when God set them free, right? There's the 10 plagues and he set them free. Because why? Because you're my chosen people. He gives them some rules in the wilderness. Because he says, listen, I'm going to bring you to the promised land. And when you get there, this is your home. This is the place that I've set apart for you. I've set aside for you. And you're my chosen people. But here's the deal. There's people there. There's the Canaanites. There's the Amorites. There's Jebusites, there's the Hittites, there's the Perizzites, there's the termites, there's all these different groups of people. You're gonna get there, and the thing is, you're gonna wanna live like them. You're gonna wanna look like them. You're gonna wanna be like them. So God says, here's the deal. I'm gonna give you some rules. You're gonna have to dress differently. Because your temptation is to be to fit in. You have to dress differently because you wanna be like everyone else, but you can't. You're gonna have to cut your hair differently because your temptation is to wanna fit in, but you can't. You gotta be different. Your temptation is you want to fit in, and so you're going to have to eat different kinds of foods. I mean, think that's what the Jewish dietary laws are so much about, right? God says you can't eat things like shellfish, lobster. You can't eat pork. And things were dark and bleak. And then came Jesus. And he fulfilled the law, and the world was good, and we can now have bacon. But the same temptation is there. The same thing is there. I don't want to be transformed. I want to be conformed to everyone around me. That's why St. Paul, writing to the Romans, he says this in Romans chapter 12. St. Paul says, listen, if Jesus is who he says he is, you got to live how he's calling you to live. And he says, I urge you, do not be conformed to this age. Do not conform yourselves to this age, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. My temptation is I want to be like everyone else. I want to be conformed to this age, but you can't be. You got to be transformed by the renewal of your mind. I want to just say one word about what renewal of your mind is all about. Because we can come to this week and we can think like, okay, so if I come to Jesus, like he's going to make me like a nicer person, right? Sure. I realize I'm kind of a jerk, and so if I come to Jesus, will he make me less of a jerk? We'll see. We basically, many of us look at Christianity like behavior modification. Okay, Jesus, it's kind of like, rough or unrough some of the rough edges. Change me where I want you to change me, but not really in the deep, dark parts of myself. We have this thing we want to call behavior modification. I don't want to be transformed. I just want to be a little bit different. But if that's how we live our Christianity, we'll never be fully transformed. Do not conform yourselves to this age, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. One of the things that means, if I'm going to have real Christianity, really going to follow Jesus, if I'm really going to be a witness, that means the things I think about, the things I choose, and the things I grow to love are going to have to be transformed. I just invite you to do this right now, just to think about this. What are the things you think about? What's the entertainment you feed yourself with? Is it like everyone else? If someone looks back at your Netflix history, will they say, oh, that's a Catholic? Or they say, oh, that's just a normal sophomore in college? How do you feed yourself? Because we're going to be conformed to whatever we inform ourselves with. And if I feed myself with garbage, you know what I'm going to have is just garbage. That's why I've used this example before, and if you've heard it before, I'm so sorry. You guys all heard P90X? Y'all heard of P90X? So I'm kind of an expert on P90X because I've started it like 10 times. But I've known people up in Duluth who've done the whole deal. Like it's 90 days, 3 months of working out almost every day for at least an hour, sometimes an hour and 45 minutes. And I've seen people who at the end of it, they've done the workout, every single workout. They've worked really, really hard for 3 months, 90 days in a row. And they'll say like, oh, Father Mike, I've done P90X. I say, oh, awesome, cool. When did you finish? Oh, I finished yesterday. Or I finished last week. I'm like, seriously? Make a muscle. Because you don't look like you just finished P90X. I've seen those commercials. I don't say that out loud. I think it, but I don't say it out loud. But my little brother, he's 10 years younger than me. A bunch of years ago, he did P90X. And when he got done, I saw him, we were at, like, my parents have a place on the lake, and so he took off his shirt to go swimming, and I'm like, dude, what the? Like, I've seen that in movies, like, what the? All these, he had veins coming down his stomach and stuff. I'm like, that's real? I thought that was Photoshop. He's like, yeah, I just finished P90X, I'm like, no, dude, I've seen people do P90X. They don't look like that. And he said this, he said, well, you've got to do the diet. Because they give you, P90X, they give you two things. They give you the workouts, and then they give you the eating plan. A lot of us think like, no, I'm working so hard that it doesn't matter what I eat. You ever do that with your prayer life? Are you kidding me? I'm going to mass every day. Doesn't matter what I feed myself with at night. I'm making a holy hour every day. Doesn't matter what kind of music I listen to. I'm doing all these religious things. Why am I not being transformed? Oh, because the time outside of holy hour, the time outside of mass, the time outside of my rosary, what am I informing myself to? That's what I'm going to conform to. Do not be conformed to this age, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. Because our goal is to look like Jesus. Our goal is to look, head through the yoke, to look like Jesus. But also our goal is to look like Jesus. Our call is to live like Jesus. In fact, this is what it is to be a Christian, right? No, I won't. But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you, and then you will be my witnesses. When people see you, they will see me. Our goal of the Christian life is not behavior modification. It is to look like Jesus. It's to live like Jesus. It's to live so transformed, so free, and so courageous that it changes the world. I just think a lot of us can't imagine being that free. I think a lot of us can't imagine having that much courage. To say, I went away, I met Jesus, and now I'm gonna live like Jesus. I'm gonna look like Jesus. I'm gonna have the freedom that I don't have to look like everyone else. I don't have to live like everyone else. I'm gonna have the courage to run with purpose. I'm gonna have the courage to fight with purpose. In his letter to the Corinthians, chapter 9, his first letter, St. Paul writes to the Corinthians, and he says this. It's one of my favorites. It's just awesome. You write it down, you guys. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 24 and following, he says, do you not know that all the runners in the stadium, they all run the race, but only one wins the prize? Then he says these lines, run so as to win. So many of us, we treat life, or do we treat the Catholic life like it's a fun run for the cure? That we think it's a race walk. Like, no, I'm also, because why? We get a bunch of participation trophies. St. Paul, he says, no. When you're in this race, run to win. He goes on, he says, every athlete exercises discipline in every way, and they do it to win a perishable crown. We do it to win an imperishable crown. And he says, therefore, I do not run aimlessly. Therefore, I do not fight as if I were shadow boxing. How many times do we live our Christianity like, no, here's my Sunday. The rest of the week, I just do what I want. Here's my holy hour. The rest of the day, I just do what I want. Here's my time I went to seek. It was great, but now the rest of the semester, I'll do what I want. Why? Because I'm not in a fight. I'm not in a battle. I'm not in a race. But what if you had the courage to run to win? What if you had the courage to look up and realize, I'm in a fight? What if you had the courage to realize that Jesus is not just calling me to believe in him, he's calling me to be on mission with him. That's what the yoke is all about. Look like me and live like me. Have my worldview and have my mission. I don't know if you guys know a guy his name is William Wilberforce. I don't know if you've ever heard of William Wilberforce. In the 18th century, woohoo, William, go English. So William Wilberforce was a genius. He was raised in 18th century England by wealthy grandparents. At one point, he was shipped off to his aunt and uncle's place, like 12 years old, and his aunt and uncle were Christians. And then his grandparents found out that their Christianity was infecting William, so they said, no, we can have him back. And they started disinfecting him from his Christianity. William Wilberforce graduated from Cambridge University, and he was the youngest person ever to be elected to Parliament. He was elected just 2 weeks after the required age to be elected to Parliament. He was a genius. He was incredible. He was driven. He was accomplished, and he was like a partier. He was like the St. Francis of the Englishmen. St. Francis was Italian. William Wilberforce was English, and he absolutely had no interest in Christianity. He only had interest in being like everyone else. He did it really, really well. At one point, William was going to go on vacation, and he wanted a traveling companion. And so a mutual friend recommended this guy named Isaac Milner. Now, Isaac Milner was a genius in his own right. Isaac Milner, he occupied the Malcasian chair, I think at Oxford University, which is the chair that Sir Isaac Newton once held, the chair that Stephen Hawking at one point held. This is Isaac Milner. And so William Wilberforce says, Isaac, would you like to join me on this trek around Europe? Milner says, sure. They get in the carriage and they're talking about life, talking about big ideas, talking about politics, talking about people. At one point, this one very famous pastor came up in their conversation. And William Wilberforce says, well, he makes a lot of good points, but I think he's taken this whole Christianity thing too far. And Milner looks over at him and says, I don't think you could possibly ever take following Jesus too far. And William Wilberforce had that look on his face that maybe you had when you got on the bus and looked at your traveling companion, was like, oh no. Because he realized he was traveling with a Christian, but he was traveling with a genius Christian. And for the next couple hundred hours in this carriage through Europe, they debated and discussed Jesus Christ and the truth of Jesus, that he is who he says he is. By the time William and Isaac got back to London, William Wilberforce was a Christian. He knew that Jesus is who he says he is, therefore he knew that I have to have his worldview, I have to have his mission. I don't know what to do. I'm elected to Parliament and we're all just a bunch of partiers. Maybe that's you this week. I'm going back home tomorrow. I'm not sure what to do on Monday. Because I think I believe in Jesus now, but what does God want me to do? Jesus, are you going to save the world now? No. You'll receive power and you're going to take my yoke upon you and share my worldview and share my mission. William Wilberforce gets back to London and he disappears for weeks. No one sees him. I think William's back, but no one can find him. He spent that time in council with various pastors. He spent that time in prayer, asking God, what do you want me to do? Because here I am in London, but my life's been changed because I know Jesus is who he says he is. That means I have to look at other people differently. It means I have to live differently. What do you want me to do? And he came out of that time of prayer, he came out of that time of council with 2 missions in his life. And he devoted the rest of his life to these 2 missions. One was the abolition of the slave trade in Europe. The other mission the other mission of his life was devoted to the reform of manners in England. Now, I know that sounds really wow, abolition of the slave trade. That's awesome. Reform of manners. Everyone, tea is at 4 o'clock. It goes until 4:15. You drink with your pinky out. It doesn't mean that. We'll get back to it in a second. So William spent the rest of his life trying to end the slave trade. 2 weeks before he died, the slave trade was abolished, made illegal in Europe. Now imagine someone who says, I believe that Jesus is who he says he is. So that's going to make a difference in my life. Because of that, I'm going to change my culture. I'm going to change the world in which I live. Imagine someone standing up in a culture and saying, I belong to Jesus, so I'm going to end slavery. People say, you can't do that. Our economy's based off this. You can't do that. You can't change our culture. All it takes is one person with courage. All it takes is one person with courage to change the world. He devoted his life to this mission and he transformed his culture. The other thing, the reform of manners in England. Now, we say manners and we think high tea. What he meant was morals. Because you might think, 18th century England, that was the heart of Christianity, right? Wrong. When William was alive, the morals of England were just they were out the window. I mean, there was rampant gambling. There was rampant alcoholism on every level of society. It was everyone drank. There was child labor. Back to the drinking thing, because I know you guys like that. That from the highest office to the lowest person, everyone just drank and they couldn't stop drinking. In fact, there are records of entire sessions of Parliament where they held the thing and everyone was just absolutely bombed out of their minds. When you drink so much, you need more entertainment. And so normal entertainment was enough. So they started doing this thing like bear baiting. Put bears in an arena, have them fight each other to the death. Bull baiting. When that became too little, they started having public executions. When that became too little, they started having public dissections of human beings. It was said that at the time when William was alive in London, 25% of all single women were prostitutes. And the average age was 16 years old. This is the world in which William said, listen, I belong to Jesus. He is who he says he is. And so listen, I'm not only gonna share his worldview, I'm gonna share his mission. I'm not gonna look like Jesus, and I'm gonna live like Jesus. And he transformed his world. One person with courage who says, I will not be conformed to this age, but be transformed, because I do not run aimlessly. I am not shadowboxing. You know, this week has been great, I think. Has it been a good week? But I know the temptation is going to be this. It's going to be like, this was good. I was really built up, but back on campus, I'll just be another dude, be one of the bros. Back on campus, I'll just be another gal, just another one of the single ladies, kind of a thing. I'm just gonna go back to being me, and that's good. There's something good about being in this kind of a situation. Something good about being in a youth ministry. Something good about being in a great campus ministry. But all those things they're what you call greenhouses. This week is a greenhouse. Greenhouses are really, really good. What do you put in a greenhouse? You put plants that are fragile. You put plants that are vulnerable. You put plants in the greenhouse that need to be protected. And that's good because we need to be protected. We need to grow a little bit. But you realize that you're not meant to live in a greenhouse. You're not meant to live in your campus ministry forever. This time in a greenhouse is meant to grow you so that you can be planted anywhere. Maybe you have an awful campus ministry back on your campus. Maybe you have an awesome campus ministry back on your campus. It doesn't matter, because you're not made to live in a greenhouse. You're made to live in the wild. And every single one of us, the reason why we have this week is to prepare you to be able to live anywhere. The reason why we have this awesome environment is to prepare you to live in any environment. If you're gonna live in any environment, that means you need to have roots. Jesus said, remain in me. Here's my invitation to everyone here. It's me 3 things. Then I'm done, promise. I kind of promise. First thing, I need to pray. You need to pray. And I don't just mean pray like, have your holy hour, that's awesome, or have your holy 20 minutes, that's great. But I mean, I read this awesome book by Father Michael Gately on divine mercy. So good. Oh my gosh, praise the Lord. In it, he quoted Saint Faustina. And Sister Faustina, once she said this, she said, someone was asking her, like, how do you have faith in all things? How do you trust in everything? The answer was that in every situation, if you want to know how to trust in all situations, in every situation, have thanks and praise. If you want to know how to really live your faith in every environment, that in every environment, offer God thanks and praise. Why? Because you have your head through the yoke and you're looking at the Father the way Jesus looked at the Father. You're saying, God, I don't like this moment, but I can give you thanks, I can give you praise because I know you're my good dad. So one, I need to pray. If you're gonna live in any environment, you're not made to live in a greenhouse, you're made to live in the wild. I need to be able to give God thanks and praise in every environment, even in the wild. The second thing is I know I can't do it alone. I can't do it alone. I can't be that witness to the world alone. I need someone to walk with me. I need someone to run with me. I don't want to run aimlessly, but I can't run on purpose alone. I need someone else. That's why I love. Have you guys ever seen the documentary The Human Planet? Documentary The Human Planet is awesome by BBC America. They go through all these different environments around the world, all these hostile environments where it's almost impossible to live. There was one where it's about the savannah, life on the savannah. And there was these hunters who were going out hunting wildebeest. And the wildebeests, they didn't hunt the wildebeest, they tracked down lions who hunted the wildebeest. And then they scared the lions away. Oh, they did this. It was crazy. They had these 3 men. They tracked down a pride of lions that had just killed a wildebeest. It's like 14 lions devouring this wildebeest. And these 3 men, they saw it. And at one point, as one, they got up, shoulder to shoulder to shoulder. They just started walking towards the lions. You're like, what? And there was one guy, one girl, whatever it is, walking toward the lion, he beat a dead guy or dead girl. But because there's 3 of them, a 3-string cord is not easily broken. 3 of them, they walk towards the lions. knowing where they're going, not aimlessly, not shadowboxing. The lions see them and they scattered. The men walk up, they hack away like a leg, throw it over their shoulder, and they all walk away together. I can't do it on my own. I can't do it on my own. One, I need to remain in him, to give God thanks and praise in all situations. Two, I have to do it with someone else. And lastly, I need to be prepared to fight. I need to be prepared to fight. Because I gotta tell you guys, I don't want to be like a buzzkill, but you're in a fight. I don't know if you know this, but this is the age of the martyrs. This, what we're living in right now, is the age of the martyrs. More people have been martyred in the last century than all other centuries combined. This is the age of the martyrs. When Jesus said, "You'll be my witnesses," you know what the word witness is in Greek? It's the word martis, which is martyr. You will be my martyrs. That means we need to be ready to fight. Well, no, Father, this is America. This is the United States. You don't need to fight in America. You don't need to fight in the United States. Well, I want to tell you a story. Some of you have heard it before. 2 years ago, Mark Bartek, who works for Focus, he told me this. He told me about a man in the Fujian province of China. In the Fujian province of China, it's still illegal to be Catholic. And so this man, he was Catholic and his family were Catholic, and so what they would do is they would have Mass in secret in their homes. They put their lives on the line just to have the Eucharist. So they have sentries outside. They have Mass in the middle of the night. The sentries outside watching for the officials to come. They had Mass one night, and at the end of Mass, the sentries rushed in and said, officials are on their way. So everyone scattered. The priest ran off, the family ran off, all these other families ran off, but it was this guy's house, so he didn't have anywhere to run off to. So they burst into his home and they arrested him and they took him to wherever they held him and they started to torture him. For 3 to 4 weeks, day after day, night after night, they would strip him naked. They would take a jerry-rigged cattle prod that was rigged to give up to 1,000,000 volts. They put it on different parts of his body. Say, just tell us where the priest is. You can go back to your family. Tell us where the priest is and you can go home. But this man, strapped to this thing, getting electrocuted all over his body, getting burned all over his body, he knew that if he told where the priest was, his neighbors, his family, no one would have Mass for who knows how long. He just loved the Eucharist so much that he's like, no, I can't give it up. I can't say no to this. I can't betray the Eucharist. After 3-4 weeks of torturing him straight, they're like, we can't break this man, and so they let him go. Pretty soon, as soon as he could actually, he arranged passage to the United States, and he moved to a city in this country, just a couple years ago. And he got here, when he got here, he was so overjoyed because among other things, he got to go to Mass every single day. And it wasn't an hour and a half. He got to go to Mass every single day. He got to go to Mass on Sundays and no one was arresting him. He got to go to Mass in the middle of the day. But he also realized something pretty quickly. He realized that in America, if you work harder, you make more. He realized in America, if you do more, you get more. And he said, I want to give more to my family. I want to do more. I want to accomplish more. I want to be more in this country. And so pretty quickly, he didn't have enough time to go to daily Mass. And as time went on, he occasionally would skip Sunday Mass. Another year went by. He'd only go to Mass on Christmas and Easter. And when I first heard this story, that Easter, the man didn't even go to Mass. And Mark shared this with me, and I want to share this with you. He said, I don't want you to miss this point. What communism, what torture, what communism couldn't do, what torture couldn't do, what electrified cattle prods couldn't do, our culture could do, and it didn't even have to try. The torture could not break this man's love for the Eucharist, and our culture was able to strip this man's love for the Eucharist, and it didn't even need to try it. You guys, we're in a fight. And it is time to fight. It's time to witness. It's time to look like Jesus and to look like Jesus. And this is exactly what the church needs right now. This is the last thing. This is not a new story. This is an old story. We are exactly where the church has always been. In the year 33, at the very beginning of Christianity, when everything looked like it was over and Jesus was dead, all of a sudden and he's alive again. There's Peter and there's Paul, there's Mary Magdalene, there's Mary, the mother of God. They came together and they were witnesses. And all of a sudden Christianity just began to bring hope and light and life to the world. And then years went by, and here's the 400s and 500s, 500 years later, you have the church that gets all big and fat and comfortable. And the church gets corrupted and starts falling into disrepair. And so what does God do? God raises up someone like Augustine and like Benedict and like Scholastica. And all of a sudden the church gets renewed because there's people who are like, no, listen, if Jesus is who he says he is, I am who he says I am. I'm gonna be his witness. I'm not just gonna believe in him, I'm gonna live like him, I'm gonna look like him. And the church was renewed. And then another 400, 500 years later happened, and the church again gets bloated and gets comfortable and gets soft. It falls into disrepair. And so what's God do? He raises up people. He raises up people like Francis and Dominic and Claire. And all of a sudden, it's the people who says, listen, this is the age of the martyrs. This is the age of the witnesses. I don't just want to believe in Jesus. I want to belong to Jesus. I want to look like Jesus and I want to live like Jesus. And the church is renewed. Again, centuries pass. It's the 1500s and the church is just bloated and comfortable and falling apart. What does God do? He raises up St. Charles Borromeo, St. John of the Cross, Teresa of Avila, Catherine of Siena. And what happens is the church gets renewed from the inside because there's people in the church who say, enough, I have courage. All it takes is one person with courage. I'm not gonna be like everyone else. I'm gonna be like him to renew the world. And here we are 500 years later, and the church is comfortable, and the church is bloated, and the church is falling into disrepair. And God will do what he always does. He will raise up saints. This is the age of the martyrs. This is the age of men and women with the courage and the freedom to look like Jesus and to live like Jesus. And those people will be renewed by Jesus, and those people who are renewed by Jesus will renew the church, and the renewed church will renew the world. It is time to get to work.